I just want to say thank you very much. But this next section is, if I could teach one thing just conceptually, that's the centerpiece of how it is that we think about freedom ministry. What you heard a moment ago was the parable that teaches what we think about it. Now I'm going to put it into more of a cognitive but also a visual format for you in a teaching that we call Levels of Change. And so what I want to talk about for a few moments is just some backdrop concepts, some ways that I want you to set your mind before we go into this teaching. The fundamental idea here is the verse out of Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. And the idea is this: I've been crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. The life that I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who died and gave himself for me. The idea is this: the life of a believer is no longer the life of a believer. The life of a believer comes from the one that we believe in. The dilemma is, often the enemy can read our Bibles to us if we're not careful. And what he'll say is, Jesus died for you, you should try harder to do better, and so it should look to everybody else like you're acting just like Jesus. That's not at all what the verse says. And what we want to talk about for the next several hours tonight is, we want to talk about how this plays itself out in our lives. So I said that I want to give you kind of a backdrop in terms of thought. The thoughts that I want you to have at the beginning of this is, I want you to have a thought that two ways I want you to prepare your mind. And both of them I'm going to tell a story. One of them is a true story about me. I just want you to know I'm willing to put my embarrassment out there to help you guys get free. The second one is just more of a word picture, or almost like a parable, to help you set the process in your mind of when we say levels of change. What do we mean by levels? So first, let me tell you a story about me. When I was 16, I had just gotten my driver's license. And, you're invincible when you're 16, right? So at this point in my life, my aunt calls me. She's in the parking lot of a library in Trenton, Michigan. It's freezing cold out, and she's got a flat tire. So 16 years old, it is Bob to the rescue. Here I go. I jump in my mother's Volkswagen van. I know, it's not really like a superhero vehicle, but pertinent to the story. I jump in my mother's Volkswagen van, and I drive down to the parking lot, and sure enough, here's my aunt in her Chevy Malibu with a flat tire, and I'm here to help. And so I look, and I discern which tire is flat. I told you I was 16. I know a lot of things at this point in my life. And I go, and I look, but my aunt has no lug wrench. Well, not to worry, in my mother's Volkswagen van, we have a lug wrench. So I go back to the back of the van, and I pull out this nice German lug wrench, and I approach my aunt's 1971 American vehicle. Anybody with me yet in the story? What you're going to discover is that at that point in time, my lug wrench is metric, and my aunt's lug nuts, not so much. Now, this is not a problem for me. Because remember, I'm 16. I'm an American male. And I'm simply going to take all of my brawn, I know, and I'm going to apply my strength to this problem. So here's what I do. I take this extra size lug wrench, and I apply it with my left hand with all of the strength that I can. I press it down against the lug nut, and I begin to torque it with my right hand with all the strength I have to torque. Now, anyone have any idea what happened next? You may think that you know what happened next, but just let me tell you just how strong and persistent I am. I didn't just strip my aunt's lug nut. I stripped 2, 3... Wait, how many lug nuts are there on a tire anyway? Of her 5 lug nuts, I stripped 4 of them beyond possible recognition as an actual piece of metal. And here's why I'm willing to just lay myself out there for you guys to tell you something. The problem was not how hard I was trying. The problem is that I was trying very, very hard with the wrong tool. Now here's what I want you to catch. Many well-meaning, pure-hearted, born-again people are walking around trying very, very hard with the wrong tools. And they're wondering why. Listen very carefully. Not only is what they're doing not working, in many cases, it's actually getting worse. See, in my aunt's situation, her problem was no longer a flat tire. Her problem was my misguided solution and the forcefulness with which I applied it. So what happens is, because we are trying very hard, very hard with the wrong tools, the force that we apply with the wrong tools actually makes things work against us instead of for us. Now, here's what happens. The enemy looks at the Christian community and he says, you are never going to make it. You stink at being a Christian. Remember the voices of that the acrobat would hear, the accusations? He looks at us and says, you're terrible at this, you're no good, you'll never succeed. And what's happening is he's trying to get you to work harder with the same tools. But what we all need to understand is it's not a question of how hard we work. As long as we have the wrong tools, the enemy is going to strip the lug nuts of our faith and convince us that Christianity works for everybody except you. If you've ever had that thought, or even just that sneaking suspicion that it works for everybody but you, this next class is really going to help you readjust your thinking and think differently about the transformation process of a believer. Now, story number 2. And like all good parables should, I'm going to start this parable out just like Jesus would. The kingdom of heaven is like potty training. I know. Someone's going to say, so what did you learn at the Freedom Ministry teaching? Well, we learned about potty training. But here's the reason I want to start out this way is that the class is called Levels of Change. And one of the things you're going to find out is we're going to teach about 5 distinct levels of transformation or change. The difficulty is most of us think wrongly about levels. And all I mean is this. If you're a hockey player, an engineer, a baker, a butcher, whatever it is you do, we think in this linear growth process that a level is, I'm going to try harder and do better. And next year I'm going to try harder and do better. Next year I'm going to try harder and better. And so when we think of levels of change, we think about this linear process of growth and transformation. That's not what I'm talking about. And so I use this parable about potty training to really help us understand what we're talking about with levels of change. You'll notice that we have 5 different levels that we'll look at. And so I want you to understand it this way. Here's how the kingdom of heaven is like potty training. If you've ever had an infant that you're responsible for, they wear diapers. And what you discover is there comes a moment in your relationship with this child where the diaper is in need of change. So you change it, and then it changes itself. And then you change it, and it changes itself. And you change it. And what you have is 2 to 7 years of, isn't that right? Of a kind of change that's not really change at all. In other words, what you have is a constant state of change where nothing is ever different. It's either clean or dirty. And what happens to us is we often think that way about our life with Jesus. I'm doing poorly, I come to Jesus and he cleans me up. And I'm doing well for a while, and then I do poorly, and I come to Jesus and he cleans me up. And then I slip and I'm doing poorly for a while. And we have this clean diaper, dirty diaper mentality about our faith that Jesus is there to clean up the messes we make. Well, he is willing to do that. I want you to understand and see with clarity that he came to do much more than make sure that we're not wearing dirty diapers. See, if you've been responsible for an infant that wears those diaper things, and you've had 2 to 7 years of change and change again, and it changes itself and you change it, there comes a moment in every parent's life where this blessed event that we call potty training happens. And what happens is now there's a level of change that makes this change no longer necessary. You catch it? When we talk about levels of change, we're not talking about a linear progression of growth whereby we improve a little bit each year. We're talking about a level in which each succeeding level has power over the level below it, so that if we change at this level, this one is no longer an issue. And if we change at this level, it has dominion over this one. And you'll see that by the time we get to the 5th level of change, 4 of these you and I can make changes, transformation in. And the higher we get, the more impact it has. When we get to the 5th level of change, what you're going to discover is you can't do a thing about it. But that will turn into good news, not bad news when we get there. So let's start into it. The first level of change that we're talking about is our environment. So think about this for a moment. You are, wherever you are in your life, you find yourself dissatisfied. I know, maybe not you. So let's think of someone else beside you. Wherever they are, they're dissatisfied. And so the natural leaning of the human mind is to think this: if only I had a better job. If I could just leave this family and get another one. Maybe if I had a smaller nose, flatter tummy. Maybe if I could change churches, move to a different city. And what happens is our mind automatically goes to the things that are outside of us, believing somehow that if we could just change the things outside of us, everything in our life would work. I know, that's why I said somebody besides you. But if by chance you've ever fallen into that deception, one of the things you need to know is wherever you go, there you are. And so the fallacy is, if we believe that changing our environment will have anything to do with setting us free, we're already in bondage to that belief. Paul sat in a prison cell in absolute freedom. We could go through the list of men who were tortured and who were in circumstances beyond what most of us face, and recognize, if we look closely, recognize that in the midst of their circumstance, they were free. And so what we see is anywhere from the Nazi concentration camps to the Bible stories, that circumstance cannot dictate to you freedom or the lack thereof. See, freedom, as we talked about in the introduction, freedom is when you can become the person that you're created to be. And the trick is to learn how to become that person regardless of the circumstance we're in. So as we begin this process, we have to, first of all, shoot holes in this idea that I need to change something external. If only my parents were kinder, if only my children were less misbehaved, whatever it is external to us, those things cannot keep you in bondage. If something outside of you can keep you in bondage, then you're a victim of what they do to you or don't do. God doesn't make victims. You can be free in whatever your circumstance. So here's what happens. We begin again to think about freedom, and we come to this place of maturity where we go, okay, it's not my circumstance. So what is it? Well, what happens to us is we start to look, and this is the most common trap that we find ourselves in, we start to look at this thing called behavior. Now here's the way I think about this. You can now feel like you're in church because the guy with the microphone is going to talk about your behavior. Right? And I do want to talk about the things that we do, but here's what happens. We think, I'll be free if I stop this behavior, start that behavior. Now, if you've ever tried to change, now I'm not talking about the stuff that's easy. That wouldn't be a problem, right? But I'm talking about if you have a behavior or something in your life that you wish was different, and it's been hard for you, the more you try to change, the more you're going to discover at this level, you can accomplish some things, but not the thing you're hungry for. Watch what I'm talking about. So at this level, we start to look at our behavior and say, I wish I wouldn't scream at my kids. I wish I wouldn't look at those things on the internet. I wish I wouldn't always get rejected. I wish, and we go through these lists in our mind of what I wish I wouldn't do. But what we begin to discover is connected to what we do is also what we think and what we feel. Now, these two things, connected to our behavior, our thoughts and our feelings, form in us kind of this triangle of the soul that I describe in two different ways. Here's the first way I describe it. This is the level of your experience. In other words, someone says to you, well, Bob, how are you doing? I'm doing fine. Well, how do you feel? I feel great. Well, what else is up? Well, I think everything's... So when we talk about behavior, thoughts, and feelings, we're really describing the experience of what it's like to be you. The outward expression of the way you would describe the inward experience of being you. And so what happens is when we try to change some things, we start to realize that our thoughts and our feelings are connected to our behavior. Let me give you a couple of illustrations of this that I think will be helpful. Now, don't raise your hand. Don't answer me unless you want to be an example of what I'm talking about. But just listen to the question. This is not a question for you to answer. But how many of you have ever done something stupid? Don't raise your hand. But if you've ever done something stupid, what do you then think? You think to yourself, stupid. And when you've done this stupid thing and you've thought to yourself, stupid, what do you then feel? Stupid. And the more you feel stupid, the more you say to yourself, stupid. Now, here's the question that it's important for us to look at. When you have done something stupid and you feel stupid and you're telling yourself that you're stupid, what are the odds that you're going to do something smart? Right? So what you see is this little triangle of our soul, our behavior, thoughts, and our feelings they're both fueled by and fuel one another in the process of trying to change. So I look at this habit in my life, I look at this feeling in my life, I look at these circumstances and I go, I wish this were different, and I try, and I discover that the more I focus on it, the more the thing I focus on organizes my life, because I'm trying to change my behavior, but my thoughts and my feelings are also connected to that, and it's pulling me into this downward spiral of the more I think stupid, the more I feel stupid, the more I feel stupid, the more I act stupid, and so on and so forth. Let me tell you a quick story, a true story about that. By the way, anytime I tell these stories, I have permission from the people to tell these stories. In fact, in most cases, they ask, please tell my story, okay? This is a story of a woman that I like to refer to as the depressed woman. Now, it's very important when I tell you the way I describe her that you understand there are several times throughout Scripture that we see people that are named something other than who they are today. For instance, the woman caught in adultery. You see the story of the woman caught in adultery. That's how we think of her, but from the moment that she met Jesus, that's not who she was anymore. It's a way to help us distinguish who we're talking about in what circumstance, but that label shouldn't stick. In the same way, I want you to understand that I'm going to tell you a story about a woman who was depressed, but the reason I'm telling you the story is I'm telling you the story of the day that she changed. Here's what happened. She came to me because her son was struggling, and what she said to me was, I don't need help even though I'm depressed. Please help my son, and here's the key word for me, it's too late for me. Now, if nothing else, here's what I understand. The cross of Christ says there's no such thing as too late. So when I heard those words and knowing that she was a believer, something in me just wouldn't let me talk about her son just yet. So I said, what do you mean it's too late for you? And she said, I've got terrible, terrible issues of depression. And she said, but it's too late for me. My mother was depressed, and my mother's father was depressed. Look, it's gone on almost my entire life. It's too late for me. Please just help my son. Let me describe to you for a moment, if I could, her experience of her depression. Here's what it was like for her. And it was fairly serious. You'll hear that as I describe that. She would wake up in the morning and begin to tell herself what a horrible human being she was. And how do you think she felt as she did that? She felt horrible. Now, you're going to see this throughout this triangle, right? And so when she felt horrible and she told herself she was horrible, what she would do is she would turn over, pull the covers up, and go back to sleep. In the meantime, her husband would get up and go to work. Her children would get up and go to school, and she would sleep until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. 1 o'clock in the afternoon, she would wake up and she would tell herself, I've failed again. I am a failure. She would feel like a failure, and what she would do out of that is after that kind of ping-ponged back and forth for a while, she'd reach in the drawer, pull out a sleeping pill, take a sleeping pill, and go right back to sleep at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Her husband would come home. Kids would come home. They'd take care of their dinner and their homework. You believe me? They would do whatever they did when they came home in the evening, and she's sleeping until about 7:30, 8 o'clock, and finally she'd kind of rouse herself out of her medicated state, and she'd grab the remote control of the television, kind of slink to the back room, and she'd just watch bad television until 2 or 3 in the morning, and then the next morning she'd wake up and the cycle would go over and over again. And at the point where she described this to me, that cycle had been going on for 11 years. Can you understand why she would say it's too late? I certainly can. I mean, through purely a natural mind and reasonably looking at the circumstances, you can see that she's been through some very difficult things. So what I want you to catch is this cycle. Here's the dilemma. We describe it as our experience, the level of experience, our behavior, thoughts, and feelings. It's what it's like to be me. But let me tell you the second way that I describe this level. This is also the level of our flesh. Now, let me explain to you what I mean by that. A significant percentage, perhaps I should say, of counseling really points at this level. Let me just give you some illustrations of that. There's a school of thought called cognitive behavioral therapy, and what it means is think your way into behaving better. Anyone ever diet? I mean, if you've ever tried a diet, you already know think your way into behaving better may actually backfire on you. In the same way that my lug wrench story backfired on my aunt. Using your mind to control your behavior may work in some circumstance, but you're going to find there are many circumstances that it backfires against you. Here's another one, and this one makes me laugh even harder if it weren't so sad. How about this? Rational emotive therapy. Rational emotive therapy is a school of thought that says when you think rational thoughts, you have rational emotions. I'm glad I'm not the only one laughing here, because most of us realize at some point the word rational and emotion in the same sentence doesn't even make sense most of the time. Here's the real trap for us, is that what this does to us, what these schools of thought and these schools of counseling do for us, is they set us up for this trap. Using your mind to try to control your behavior, using your mind to shape your emotions, is simply like this. It's taking your arm and arm wrestling you. Anyone see the problem here? See, if I arm wrestle me, who's going to win? Me. But the problem is, if I arm wrestle me, who's going to lose? Me. And what I end up with is this kind of sin, confess, doing well, doing poorly, clean diaper, dirty diaper, this mindset that gets us into some days I'm winning, some days I'm losing. And what's happening is some days I'm winning and some days I'm losing because I am arm wrestling me. Now, what I painted for you is this picture of how sad it is that so many different counseling theories approach this triangle and set us up to arm wrestle each other. But the real dilemma is that so does much religion. I jokingly, though not so jokingly, said, here I am, we're in church now because the guy with the microphone is going to talk about behavior. And here's what happens to us. When we gather together and we decide that here we are, we're sinners saved by grace trying to do the best that we can, and we're just going to arm wrestle ourselves some days into good behavior, and thank goodness Jesus is available on the bad days, and that's just about all we got, and let's hope we hold it together till he comes back. Well, Let's go share that with people and ask them to join. Come join my club. We're happy some days and miserable others. But listen, we've got to get a hold of this idea that, well, there's a wrestling that takes place. If we're wrestling at the wrong level, we can do as much damage to our soul as I did to my aunt's lug nuts. Because what happens is we have this false hope on the good days and the self-condemnation on the bad days, and then we convince ourselves, much like this depressed woman, you know what? It's all I got. And as long as you're convinced that it's all you got, it's all you got. Now, listen, we're 2 levels into 5. And I just want you to hear, at every level, the news gets better and better. Because what I want you to catch is, I just described to you the difficulty that most of us face, and that is, I am just trying to get me to be a better me. Oh, good news is really good news, and so we're going to get to it, all right? So here's the next thing I want you to catch is that there's this thing that happens to us. There's another level that we're going to take a look at, and this level, in the same way that our behavior has dominion over our environment. Did you catch that? The way you act affects your environment. Have you ever noticed that, married people? No, I never noticed that. We found the confusion here. The way we act affects our environment, and our environment then is under the dominion of our behavior. Now listen, I'm not saying that you're responsible for other people's choices, but what I'm saying is the way you act really affects the things around you. So what happens is, here's an example of what I'm talking about. We're driving down the street and we discover everybody out there is going too slow. Or perhaps we might consider that thou art driving too fast. And the point is that we begin to look at our environment because of our behavior, and we don't want to look at our behavior. Then we look at our behavior and we think, but I don't know how to change. Well, we're going to keep going. So I want us to take a look at this next level. This next level is what we call the level of our capabilities. Now, this level, I'm always looking for ways to say this because this one is less measurable, less visible. You can't look at someone's behavior. By the way, are you worried about the depressed lady? We're going to get back to her. We're going to rescue her before this time is over. But just in case you're thinking, wait, you forgot. No, I didn't forget, which is good news. But we'll get to her, and we're going to show you when we get to the next level, we're going to show you what happened at that level that allowed her to walk away from 11 years of depression in a moment. But before that, I want you to catch this thing called capability. See, it's this thing, and the best way I've come to describe it is our capabilities are like a thermostat set in your heart. Most of us understand thermostat. Thermostat is a mechanism that controls another mechanism, and it's controlled by the environment. And so what happens is we set the thermostat on 70, and it begins to get hotter. And when it gets over 70, it kicks in and turns on something that pushes the temperature back down to 70, right? So the thermostat in our heart works this way. Remember the depressed lady? Here's what she said. It's too late for me. I'll never be different. When we hear ourselves say or think or even give into the feeling of those ideas, this will never change. I can't ever be free from this. If that thing that you're saying will never change, you can't get free from it, will never be different in your life. If that thing is contrary to God's description of you in Scripture, then you've believed a lie if you believe it can't be changed. So the thermostat set in your heart. Let's think of it this way. And again, I try to put it in the most concrete, humanly observable ways that I can. But if you've ever tried to lose 30 pounds and you lose 10, the next 2 is a little bit harder. And the next 3 after that gets even harder. And what's happening is you're starting to push up against what you've come to accept as the upper limit of that thermostat. And often what happens is it kicks to a certain point where almost like a rubber band, it snaps and you're back down to, now you're gaining, and the 15 pounds that you lost turns into 20 that you gained, and now you're 5 pounds heavier. Part of the dilemma here is because we're using the wrong tools and trying to change at the wrong level, much like the lug wrench that we talked about at the very beginning. When we use the wrong tools, we actually can hurt things and not help things. When we're trying to arm wrestle ourselves into significant life change, we set ourselves up for those kind of failures. So what happens, wherever that thermostat is set, it kicks back in and puts immense and growing pressure on us to conform to the things that we have believed all of our life. Remember when the young acrobat had spent a year, he'd been with the family for a year, and it got harder and harder. And the more he tried to change, it was like feeling the pressure of, but I'm not one of these. And all the voices. And so what happens is the more you try to confront the things that have never changed before, the more pressure you face at this level of trying to change the things that have never changed yet. Now, at this level is a key idea, because when we go to the next level, you're going to see that at this level, much like shifting the gears on a bicycle, the mechanism of change becomes easier for you because the weight of it shifts to somebody else. That'll make sense when we get there. But I want you to